Hello, my name is Owais. You're watching my program East and West on JKBS News. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Owais Khan and I'll be your host for today. Today sitting with me is Mufti Waseem Khan. He's a scholar, he's a teacher, he's a sheikh, he's an imam, he's a mentor in Dallas, Texas to our community, elders, youth, everyone involved in our community. He studied Islam for the past 15 years. He's been giving lectures across the United States of America. He has regular programs every day online, especially during these times. And he's a person of knowledge, person to learn from. And today we'll be asking him a couple questions and have a little discussion about the society in America, especially the youth in America, and what we can do to help each other, to help the youth become better.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's an honor to be here. And inshallah, let's start. What's your first question?
You've traveled across the world. You've been to Europe. You've been to many different countries. My question for you is, comparatively, what's the main difference between the youth in Europe, between the youth in back home, the youth in the United States? What's the difference between them and how they achieve these goals of their lives?
Muslims have been in Europe far longer than they have existed in the Americas. Muslims have advanced into Europe from the time of the Sahaba, if you consider Turkey to be part of Europe or part of it. Abu Ayyub Ansari radiallahu ta'ala anhu was buried, a Sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ, the one where the Prophet ﷺ stayed in his home in Medina. He's buried in Turkey. Abu Ayyub Ansari radiallahu ta'ala anhu is buried in Turkey. So the Muslims held an empire in Europe as well. Islamic Spain from 711 till 1492, 700 years, 800 years living and existing in Europe. And Muslims have migrated to Europe far earlier, as we can see centuries earlier, right in the beginning of Islam, than they have in America. So American youth don't have a support mechanism or system or a history of Islam in America. They're basically the ones that are building the history of Islam in America. That's a very distinctive difference, because the Muslim conquerors or scholars or apologists, propagators, preachers that came to Europe, they had a definitive motive in their mind. That we're here to spread Islam, we're here to talk about Islam, we're here to help people become better individuals. That was their sole goal. They didn't travel to Europe for economic reasons. They didn't make this journey for that reason. This is a very important distinction, because the roots that were laid of Islam in Europe, though it was centuries ago, was on Islam and Deen. However, in America, the concept was different. You gotta understand, over the last 1400 years, largely, wealth has existed in the Muslim empire, or in the subcontinent, or areas generally dominant, or the African Sahara, Mansa Musa, all these, they were wealthy themselves. Europe was in dark ages. Europe wasn't something that you went to because you were looking for a better life. It wasn't the place that you went for. So the only reason you went to Europe was for one reason, and that was giving da'wah. And that was preaching, and that was reminding people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Foundational differences. America's, the immigrant population largely came here for financial reasons. So their focus remained on earning a livelihood, which they were able to do very quickly and very successfully in their own lifetime. Generally, wealth takes generations to build. In the past, it would take generations. But the unique thing about America was that they built the wealth quickly. So now you had these people who grew up in poverty, who grew up without access to whatever they wanted to eat. They didn't have access to whatever they wanted to wear, cars, transportation, security. They didn't have these things. So they came to America, but they had their religious foundation and values that was inside them. And they tried to build a better world for their children. The children growing up only knew one thing, and that was the grind and the constant effort to earn money. The immigrant parents, had to work harder. So all they see of their parents the purpose that they see. There, as they say in Urdu, kuin kemendak, right? You have a frog that lives inside a well. All it knows is this world. So the world that the youth in America know is a very capitalistic world. It's a hustling world. And even in America, all the youth aren't the same. New York youth are different, Dallas youth are different, Chicago youth are different, Florida, California. Youth in America, America's so big, it's got 4 time zones. They vary largely. So the fundamental difference I see between European Muslim youth and American Muslim youth is an identity crisis. That the European Muslim youth, they know that they are Muslim and they're very well rooted and understand their Islam. However, American Muslim youth, in their idea, their Americanism comes first, and what values of Islam can easily be integrated with their American values, they will go along with it. Whether it's social justice, Black Lives Matter, women's rights, they'll go along with it. But the moment something occurs that is contrary to what societal norms are or the social media culture, then that part of Islam is not as important. That is why beards, for example, is very common amongst Muslim youth in Europe, in England, France, and all these places. In America, it's not. Again, it's an identity crisis. Hijab is very common. I mean, you have legislation trying to clamp down. America, they don't need to do it. Because for every one person who wears a hijab, there's 100 others that don't. Whereas in Europe, for every one Muslim that wears the hijab, the ratio is far less. The divide is far less. So identity crisis is the fundamental difference I see between American Muslim youth and Muslim youth in Europe or back at home.
That was really interesting. I never really thought about it like that. I thought since we're all Western societies, the youth are the same, like the culture's the same. But when you think about it, the history and what it led up to, you can get a bigger grasp and understanding of it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to step back for a moment and see what brought you there. If you can't understand your past, you won't understand your future. And that's an important aspect and realization for every one of us. Why do we have religion? Why do we have deen? Why do we have Islam? Because we have to understand our past in order to write our future. But if we don't know our past, then we're writing our future with based on how I want to write it, or whoever tells me around me. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, it's good or bad. You go in any political spectrum, let's take abortion for example, you'll find the left, abortion is the right of women. You'll find the right, we're pro-life. So who decides what's right or wrong? Who decides whether this one is correct opinion or the other is a correct opinion? So mankind itself is deficient to make calculated decisions on these type of issues. And there are strong divides between capitalism, socialism, communism, running of governance. There are strong divides in these things on resources, how to deal with them. So the only way to understand how to deal with these things is to look back. And the way of looking back and understanding how you got there will help you get further. But if you can't understand how you got there, you'll just remain there and you won't grow.
Coming back to the original question, do you think the societal norm of financial freedom belongs to America, and how you said in the history of the European countries, people went for da'wah? Do you think that America can be so-called fixed, or will it always stay as a financial free country where people just go for finance and get a better life?
I think the most interesting thing about this is the word always, right? Yeah. There isn't a country in the world that has always existed. There isn't a superpower that has always existed. You go from the Greek Empire to the Roman Empire to the Byzantine, to the Chinese empires, to the Mongols, to the Mongolians, to the Mughal. You go to the African empires, you go across the world, the Dutch kingdoms, the British kingdoms. There is no seat that remains perpetually. It's the inevitability of life. How long it will last, how long it will be dominions, it's exciting to see. In our lifetime, it will probably exist. But again, the Soviet Union, where is it today? The Ottoman Empire, 500 years, where is it today? You have the British Empire in the early 1900s, was the largest country ever existed. The sun never set. How small is it today? You can travel the whole Europe, the whole England in one day. So nothing always exists. That's just a side point. The other thing is that I think that America offers a very unique value to Islam, and that is the freedom of speech. And I think that American imams and American scholars and American du'at, they really maximized it. Now you also have that financial and that selling pay-per-view Islam that you have, and that's a different discussion, and it's abhorrent. It feeds into the American culture because they're so fixated on Netflix, and they're so fixated on views, and they're so fixated on spending. So the American culture is very different. In Europe and things, it's very foreign to hear that someone will pay to listen to a class. I remember listening to Mu'tar Jalil in RIS, and in Canada, it's the largest conference in North America. 20,000 people come. Sitting right in the front. And Marna said, it was his first bayan in RIS, and he said, "Bhai," he said, "मैंने तो मुफ्त में जिंदगी बयान किए, आप लोगों ने तो पैसा देकर सुनने के लिए आए." He said, "In my entire life, I give bayan and lectures for free. People listen. I've never heard of someone paying to listen to a lecture." So you have that deficiency that takes place. It has its pros and it has its cons. But the American value of freedom of speech is priceless. It does have a cost to it, but the pros are priceless. And the American imams and scholars and the youth, because they're more academic and they are so focused. I told you, the immigrant population came here and their focus was what? Build, and their focus was the corporate system. So it's very uncommon to find children or youth who are not pursuing a degree or pursuing something. You'll find people drop out, but largely they're pursuant of degrees, versus in Europe or versus in South Africa. You don't find that as largely common over there. You find people getting to their family business, taxi driving, because they have to make means. Europe is also more expensive. Cost is also much higher. So now the youth is dealt with different challenges. Now, our youth has the positive that they're academic. So they like to learn. They like to be challenged, which is good. But the problem is that they come from a very critical mindset. So anything they hear, the first thing is a no. From a no, they turn it into a yes. So the first thing is skepticism. The first thing they hear is, it can't be. And you have to prove to me, how can it be? Whereas the value of Islam is what? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. It is. This is how it is. Now the skeptic mind will be like, well, how can I say God exists? So that's the problem with skepticism. And this is the problem with the secular mindset. Versus the traditional mindset which says, no, Allah is, so Allah is. There is no skepticism for it, there's no question for it. So I think that we have a promising future because I think that our youth embody potential. And I think our imams and scholars can influence them positively. And I think that they can be lawyers and they can be doctors and engineers and chemists and journalists and have a wide array of professions and make a huge difference with the resources they have. However, I also think that if we go down the route of just building our own financial institutions, then I think that the same thing that happened to Islamic Spain will end up happening to us, which is that we will be wiped off and there is going to be no level of faith that will remain with us. The masjids will turn into museums and Islam would just be taught in books that there used to be Muslims over here.
So you've mentioned family influence on the faith of the children towards their Islam. How and what are the similarities or maybe even differences between the children's relationship with their parents in Europe and in America?
So Europe, this is a geographical question. And that is that Europe is much more smaller and families tend to live much more closer. That is why it's very common for girls in England or Europe to say that we're not going to move abroad. We're not even going to move from our city. I know in England it's very common that a girl from East London would not be willing to marry a boy from West London because the distance is too far and I want to be by my family. So geographically, everyone is living much closer. So family values, my uncle is here, my aunt is there, my cousin is this, my brother is that. The family, friends, everyone is living in the same area. They don't need to drive to the grocery store. They just walk down the street. They bump into people. They know them. Everyone sees you. Your eyes are on you, right? Based on that, the relationship grows very strong between the families. In America, generally people are not surrounded by their family. And even if they are, it's not like, so for example, you have Brussels, right? You won't have just Muslims and you just don't have family in Brussels. You have it in the surrounding suburbs of Belgium, in the other towns, things that are sometimes flights away. So I have relatives that are in Chicago. It takes me a 2.5-hour flight to see them. I have relatives in California, in Canada, in New Jersey, Florida, other places. I have to travel to see them. Okay, what about I have family in Dallas where I'm living here? Well, in my own town of Plano, I don't have family, but I have it in Frisco and different suburbs. So the interesting thing is that because of the distance that we have to travel, we don't see them on a common day, the relationship also becomes distant. And that is why American children are not as close to their family or their parents as European Muslim youth are, because of the geographical difference between the two of them. And I think the only way to make this a solution is that live around family members, live around the masjid, live around the community. Because the interesting thing is that I noticed that those youth who grew up around a masjid, their friendship stayed cemented their entire youth and adulthood. They stayed connected because they shared a common bond, and that was the masjid. They grew up around the same masjid. And I've seen them in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and they would reflect and say, well, we used to pray here, we all used to go. That relationship and living around the masjid, I think, helped preserve their faith and also preserve their family. There's no way that if you try to preserve your children's faith in Allah, Allah will take your children away from you. No, it's the opposite. If you preserve the iman of your children, Allah will give your children back to you and make them yours. But if you abandon Allah and you go for the dunya, then Allah will make your children also go for the dunya and abandon you. Because the dunya says that you need to get me. Doesn't matter who you hurt, who you harm, you need me and you need as much as me as you can. Whereas deen says what? Atir Allah, atir Rasul, obey Allah, obey His Messenger. And then your parents. So how can you match where this one says, the deen says, obey your parents, respect your parents, treat them kindly. Whereas the dunya says you're only successful when you have your own place. When you're living on your own. When you're working on holidays, you're a good worker. You're doing nights and days, great worker, good corporate, you're going to rise up the corporate ladder. Now all of these things are telling us what? We're better this way. Where Sharia tells us no, the dunya will come, that is destined for you. Your parents, they're limited. I was talking to one of my students yesterday, and he's studying with me and he's also working. And he's wealthy. His parents told him that, don't work. And I said to him, you have a few years with your parents and you have a lifetime to earn dunya. If you were to take all the dunya you earned and all the dunya you had and all the dunya that everyone had, from Adam to the last man, from Hawa to the last woman, and you tried to buy back one more second from your parents, you cannot. You are left to seeing them in dreams, listening to their voicemails. In your lifetime, you didn't call them at all. But after they pass away, looking at their number, I know some people, they keep the same phone line running. Nostalgic, hear their voicemail. But we have time right now. Let's invest it. And let's value our parents. So problems are everywhere. However, there's always a solution to a problem when you put your trust and faith in Allah. Jazakallah khair for having me.
Jazakallah khairan, Mufti Sahab. Thank you for all the viewers for tuning in on this episode. Inshallah, we will see you next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.